Okay, good evening, everyone. Rabbi Jacobson is my name, and I want to begin by wishing everyone here a Shana Tova, a blessed year. As they say, the Shana Tova Masuka, a good and sweet year. In all our needs, material and spiritual health, parnasa, which is a livelihood, and children, and love and happiness, in a revealed fashion. Being that it's 1 week right before Rosh Hashana, which is exactly a week from tonight. So, I'd like to dedicate this class to speaking about the New Year. Now, this just as by means of a short introduction, we have a New Year's Day to compare it in the Western world, in the Gregorian calendar, January 1st. And the parallel between that New Year and the Rosh Hashanah New Year that's coming next week is quite stark. In the sense that New Year's Day, really, besides for social and perhaps vacation value, it doesn't really have anything beyond that. No, it's like a day of many college football games, the bowls, and sales. Of course, it comes 7 days after the Christmas. So some associate it with this Jewish guy that was born then, and then his bris was on January 1st. But nobody celebrates it because of that, per se, circumcision. So what really happens on January 1st? Nothing special. Except it's a man-made designated date where we have to have some point where either the fiscal year or the social year begins. So it's January 1st. On the other hand, Rosh Hashanah, the reason in Judaism time, the reason that different holidays take place at different dates is not an imaginary date that's just chosen, is because it reflects, as I've discussed many times here, energy. Time in Jewish thought is energy, flow of energy. And like all energy has its own cycle and its own rhythm. And as such, something actually does happen next week, Wednesday night. And the way the Kabbalists put it, I'm just quoting now the Arizal, Isaac Luria, the great 16th century Kabbalist, he puts it this way in mystical, poetic terms, that as the sun sets at the end of the year, with meaning next week, Wednesday evening, as the sun sets on the eve of Rosh Hashanah, the entire universe goes into a sleep, to a cosmic and spiritual sleep, anticipating and waiting for its contract to be renewed on Rosh Hashanah. And we help renew that contract through our actions and through our prayers and through our blowing of the shofar on that day. That helps create a new flow of energy. And as the Arizal and also the other mystics, including the Alter Rebbe of Shneur Zalman, writes in Tanya, that every year Rosh Hashanah, new energy enters into existence. An unprecedented new energy, one that never, ever was here before. So when you think of it in that context, then there's actually a real opportunity here for all of us to actually begin anew. It's not just, as I said, an imaginary or a superficial day in the year. Something actually happens on Rosh Hashanah. And obviously there's no magic without us making some effort, but if there's a certain energy in a particular environment or in a particular situation, a wise person tries to find ways to exploit and capitalize on that opportunity, which we do all the time. People who are sensitive to different forces in life, and this could be business people who have good instincts, when to buy and sell, or others who have more psychological instincts. You go into a room, you can sometimes pick up a vibe. People who are more trained or more sensitized to solve matters can often see that there's a particular situation. Sometimes it's a negative vibe. You mind closing the door there? Sometimes it's a negative vibe, and sometimes it's a positive one. And obviously, when it's a positive one, it's a great opportunity that we can, as I said, channel and capitalize on. So Rosh Hashanah is a new opportunity for all of us. Now, you may wonder then, will you feel it next Wednesday night, and Thursday and Friday, 2 days Rosh Hashanah? Obviously, it's like everything in life. You feel it only if you are sensitive to it. Sometimes when a person is spaced out, or is distracted, or is anxious, you don't feel a lot of things, even though they're happening right in your own proximity. If you are yourself in a state of detachment or dissonance, or you're, as I said, anxious or upset, you'll miss a lot of things. You may even miss your own salvation may be there, and you miss the boat. This happens all the time. People pray and ask for different things, and then when it's given to them, they may be distracted by their own mood or their own negativity, and they don't even see or recognize that their prayers were answered. So like it is with all energy in life, it comes and then it will go. And the question is whether you use the opportunity or you miss it. So Rosh Hashanah is the same thing. The only way you can really know whether you feel it or not is if you prepare for it, and then you do something to channel it into your life. And then you can tell, and then you can see. But we live in a very materialistic world where we measure and we value things based on superficial externals. So for us, if it looks, feels, tastes, touch, and smell good, that's enough for the momentary gratification that we get from it. It requires a little discipline, and a lot of discipline, and a deeper sense of things to be able to appreciate things that are not necessarily that obvious. So the truth is, therefore, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, the whole holiday season is really a challenge to us, not just an opportunity, of whether we can be sensitive to something on a deeper level. So in a way, the whole holiday structure and the prayers are all really meant to do just that. I mean, you could have the energy flowing, but if we did not spend the time either in prayer or in a synagogue or wherever it is that's conducive to tapping into that energy, as I said, it will come and go. So in truth, all the activities of Rosh Hashanah that we're addressing here now are really meant to be like tools. So imagine you have in your backyard, you discover you have a very precious well. It could be a well of water. I don't know if an oil well is considered to be a virtue, but I guess it has value today. But let's say you discover there's a well deep down your backyard or under your home. So even if you know it's there, that's only half the story. The other half is how you're going to access it. So you could have a treasure right near you, but you need to have tools. In the case of a well, you need to dig it up. You need certain equipment and so on. And the same is true on the spiritual level. We all have various different resources at our disposal all the time. And then there are times in the year, like I mentioned with Rosh Hashanah, that new opportunities come our way. But the question is, what tools do you have? What are you using to access it? So if you're going to try to use a shovel to access emotional fortitude, it won't work, because a shovel only can dig up earth, can dig up something that's material. I've told the story here more than once, I believe, that there were these two little boys. One would turn out to be a great Rebbe, and this was his brother, and they both grew up in their Rebbe's home, so they, as children, would play Rebbe and Chassid, Rebbe and disciple. As children do, they copy what they see around them, for good and for not good. In this case, it was for good, so they were playing Rebbe and Chassid. One of them dressed up like a Rebbe, one dressed up like a Chassid. They were like 4 or 5 years old. They were a year apart, I believe, or 2 years apart. And one of them, and then the child that dressed up like a chassid walks in to the Rebbe, who's dressed up like a Rebbe, and says to him, asks him a question. He says to him, so tell me, what is a Jew? What is a human being? And his brother tells him, a human being, a Jew, is fire. So his brother grabs his arm and he says, so Rebbe, tell me, if a Jew is fire, why is it when I grab your arm, I don't get burned? So he answered, his brother answered, his younger brother, who was playing the Rebbe, answered, because when fire touches fire, it doesn't get burned. So you can imagine an answer like that, he would turn out to be all right, as he turned into an adult. understanding certain things like that. And that's the truth in all of life. It all comes down to, sometimes we don't even know what we should be accessing. But even there, times often we do know what we need to access, the tools are off. So there could be two mistakes we can make. We either not know what we're supposed to be doing, what we're supposed to, rather, what potential there is and what treasure is there, what resources we have. And the second is we may know the resources, but we don't have the tools. Or we don't know what tools to use, or we use the wrong tools, or we use the tools that we're most accustomed with. You know, like that joke goes about the guy's looking for his keys in the dark, and so a neighbor comes by and says, let me help you look for them. And they're looking, they can't find anything. So he says to him, where did you lose them? Let's retrace the steps. So he points like 100 yards away. So he says, so why are we looking here? He says, because here's where the light is shining. It's too dark there. Which is the classic mistake that all of us make. You look where it's easy. And obviously, you could think of it as a chelam type of joke. But nevertheless, the idea is that that often our mistake is not knowing what tools to use. Or we use the tools that we're accustomed with. For example, who taught us how to love? Love is clearly a very real part of our lives. We need it. It makes a person whole, whether it's the nurturing part of it, the intimacy, the companionship, love, with all its dimensions. I'm not going to analyze now what love is per se. But who taught us how to love? So that question is usually not really asked. When people say, I don't know how to love, or my love is falling apart, or it's not working, I can't find a healthy relationship, as an enduring one, etc., etc. So we have today all kinds of manuals and books and techniques. I discussed it at length last week, whether love is a verb or a noun. I'm not going to review that right now. But the thing that we rarely look at is what our tools are. Because it's very hard to look at yourself. It's always easy to look at someone else. So in love and relationships, there's no question, knee-jerk reaction most of us have is that the problem is with somebody else. And even if we acknowledge at some point in our lives, when things have really not worked for a long time, that there may be also a little problem with us, it's often minimized. Because it's very hard to look at yourself, especially in the areas that are very personal and emotional, and we're subjective. So where do we learn how to love? It's very obvious, where we learn everything. When we were young children, we were impressionable children. We learned from those around us. The first people who loved us or were supposed to love us were our parents. And that's exactly where you learn how to love, or you don't know, or you learn how not to love, or distorted tools, etc., etc. And then at some point it becomes a vicious cycle, generation after generation, of distorted tools to the point we don't even know where we began. Just to use an example, and there are many other examples. Take all the intangibles of life, and you'll find it very, very complicated. Because we don't know what tools to use, because we don't know what it is, the commodity, what it is that we're dealing with. Like I discussed last week, if love is a noun and you think it's a verb, then you're going to be looking for the wrong tools. You're going to look for tools, techniques. You know, if finding love is like going shopping, except not exactly the same way you can find it on the shelf, but the idea that you're going to acquire a commodity, an entity, or something like that, then the tools you're going to use are very similar to the tools that we use when we go shopping, when we go seeking for something. But if love is a different type of entity, that let's say it's an entity that emerges instead of something you acquire, it emerges from within, then it's a whole different set of tools that is necessary. So besides knowing what our resources are, which itself is a challenge, is also knowing what type of resources they are and what type of tools will work in that particular situation. And there are tools. For example, I mentioned last week, I said, the verse in Mishlei, the book of Proverbs, he says, Kamayim aponim leponim kein leva adam la'adam. Which means as a face is reflected in water, one heart is reflected in another. Which is a secret that sounds so simple, but it is the secret of real love. And that is, you cannot love if you're not loving yourself. Love elicits love, and lack of love elicits lack of love. Basically, it's love breeds love. When words come from the heart, they enter the heart. Now, the fact is that some of us may speak from our hearts and it doesn't enter, let's say, another person, so how's that formula work? Well, question number one is, did you really speak from your heart? Who determined that? And we really did it. And secondly, it's true, people can be blocked, and maybe you have to dig deeper into your heart. But those who've mastered the art of the heart, who've mastered the language of the heart, know that there are particular techniques, and they're not techniques you read in the best-selling books, because they're techniques that really force you to have to look at yourself more than rather than just look at, I'll do this different, I'll do that different. It's a whole different attitude. For example, how would you answer this question? If you don't love yourself, are you capable of loving someone else? Most people avoid that question because they don't want to have to explore whether they love themselves. And people think they could love others even though they don't really love themselves. Or we don't even know whether we love ourselves. What does that mean? You know, on one hand, you could say all of us are subjective creatures, and we all have egos, and we all have self-love. Yeah, but then we also have an element called self-loathing. Self-love is not always the same thing as self-esteem. Now, I can go on and on with different examples. All this was really meant to explain how there are different energies that flow in our lives, and you have to find the right tools that fit that type of energy. So if newness and renewal, an ability to experience something completely new on Rosh Hashanah is the power of the day, then you have to have tools that are commensurate and proportionate to the concept of renewal. In other words, if something new is coming into your life tomorrow, or in this case next week, if you're not in that mindset, it will come and go, it will pass. So it's like somebody's ready to send you a very special gift, but this gift requires a certain place to store it, and you don't have that place to store it, or the home that you have, the place, your storage place is so full of dirt that it will defile the gift. Then the gift may come your way, but it just won't work because you did not create what we call a keli, a container for it. So every energy, as the Kabbalists explain, needs a container, and if not, the energy expires. It doesn't have anywhere to rest, has nowhere to manifest, and therefore the kelim, the containers we build, are critical in the process, in the partnership, so to speak, with God. So God can bless you and bestow upon you everything you wish, but there's some things you have to do for it to manifest. If you have holes in your pockets, and you're blessed with something that fills your pockets, it won't stay there too long because your pockets have holes. So with that in mind, let's go to the topic. I mean, this is the topic, but more directly, I titled the class, Do You Feel Drained? You know, and a few people saw that title, they were very depressed, and they said, why do you have to depress me so much with such a title? You know, wait till you see the image that my office found for it. It'll really depress you. But you know something? Well, first of all, there's a mischievous part of me that always likes to talk about things that are not comfortable. So let's start with that. Secondly, just because some of us are uncomfortable, maybe that's a good reason to talk about it. And the question is, how drained are we? It's a big question as well. And I always think about it. Like on your computer, you can tell more or less, not more or less, actually, you can tell exactly how much of the hard drive is taken. You know, you look at the computer, you look at the properties, and you know that's, okay, 40%, 20 gig out of 180 gig, or today it's what's after gigs, whatever that thing is called, terabytes, etc., etc. But it all has measurements, and you have the diagnostics that tell you exactly how much of your hard drive is taken. The question I always wonder is about in our personal lives. Do you know how much of your hard drive is occupied with, let's say, anxiety or fear? You know, first of all, we don't even know how big our hard drive is. That's firstly. So that's number one. Number two, it's very hard to say, you know, how much of your mind and heart is free to really experience something completely new. Newborn children have a complete empty hard drive. They're born because they have no baggage. They have no history. They have no scars. They have no wounds. A healthy child, a newborn child, is a clean slate. But then life begins to happen. And the child will begin to absorb blows. You know, they may, hopefully small blows. But life has its blows. Every one of us is going to get our curveballs. And then, unfortunately, if something serious happens, it has a big impact. No one can really ever measure this because there's no physical way to measure the psyche. So it would be very nice if someone could figure out a diagnostic, like, you know, you were born, let's say, what's the average age, the median age of this group here, 28? Philip, what do you think? Yeah? I'm talking about I'm talking about in spiritual maturity. What would you say? It's not a minus, right? Okay, fine. So, if someone could come up with some type of way of measuring, you're born this year and year, let's say 1970. Okay, anyone was born in 1970 here? And you're born in 1970, and then some way of gauging what happens to your life. But how every experience, I'm not talking about two superficial experiences, we're talking about the more serious ones, begins to impact. We know, for example, when you see a newborn child, you see a healthy newborn child, you see the way they breathe. Asleep or awake, there's just a complete symmetry. You could actually see the chest heaving up and down. Because their lungs are functioning completely. There are no toxins. By the time we're age 8 or 9, they say, you're already only using around 70% or 80% of your lungs. I don't know, by the time you're 30, 40, I don't know where it's at. Maybe a little higher. Not because, even if the child has a very healthy hygiene and diet and so on, is because we live in a world that absorbs and inhales toxins. So at some point the toxins begin to settle at the bottom of the lung, which is why, for example, if you take a full breath in, unless you're in really great shape and conditioned, a full breath in, you usually will cough. You cough because we're used to using that part of our lungs. I'm just using a small example. Same thing as you can gauge, for example, the arteries or veins, how open and how, God forbid, blocked they may be. And then there are other elements of life, that aging process, that affects each of us. I hope I'm not depressing anyone with this type of discussion. And Botox doesn't help in the internal dimension. Remember that. So, okay. But imagine you were able to gauge the same thing, what happens psychologically to us. We begin, as I said, a clean slate with all our expectations and dreams and aspirations and everything we ever would want. A newborn child, everything, it's like a clean slate, as I said. The road is open to every possibility. Yet then life begins to affect disappointment, duplicity, a lie, pain, abuse, a loss. Some things that are man-made, some things are just due to what they call an act of God. Like hurricanes and earthquakes. And we haven't had a volcano here yet, have we? In this past year. So the life begins to wear a person down. And as I said, we have no way of gauging it. But clearly, we're clueless to the extent of how much of our so-called psychological lungs and heart and mind is really free. And how much of it is occupied is because of that baggage. And I've discussed this here a few times. The biggest mitzvah of all is the first mitzvah to Abraham, who we read about on the first and second day of Rosh Hashana, that Abraham, the first commandment said to him was, Lech lecha ma'atzecha me'ladtecha me'beis avicha, which means leave your land, the place of your birth and the home of your parents, and go ela eretz asher ereka, and go to the land that I will show you. Now, obvious question is, it seems like a reverse problem here. When you give someone directions to go somewhere, more important to emphasize the destination than the departure. You know where you are. You need to know where to go. So you may live in New York and someone tells you go here and here, a different country that you're not familiar with. So they have to tell you where, what country, what city, what state, what city, what zip code, what address, landmarks and so on. And here, God reverses it. When it comes to destination, it's completely vague. The land that I will show you. Does he go north, west, south, east? When it comes to the point of departure where Abraham was, and he knows where he is, God, in 3 different ways, says basically the same thing. I mean, there's a distinction between them, but essentially your land, place of your birth, home of your parents. Obviously, they're not synonymous. Your land doesn't have to be your place of birth, and your place of birth not, let's say, the home of your parents. But basically, there are three descriptions of where he was. For Abraham, actually, they were all three. There was the southeast, what is today modern-day Iraq. It was called Mesopotamia in those days. Called the Euphrates Valley. And Abraham knew where he was, and he lived. It was his land. It was the home of his parents, and place of birth, and his home of his parents. So why did God reverse it when it comes to destination? Very vague. When it comes to departure, very, very explicit. Three different expressions. What would have been wrong if God just said, leave where you are and go northeast, or northwest, along the Euphrates, go north, then make a west, make a left, until you reach a land, it's called the land of Canaan. I mean, there were landmarks, there are ways to describe it. No. The answer is because the Torah is not a GPS, and it's not a geography book, and it's not a book about how to travel. God wasn't telling Abraham where to go, and if Abraham was wise enough, if he told him to go, it was a spiritual commandment, and it was all about spiritual traveling. It was a physical journey, but it was meant to be much deeper than that. And what was God telling Abraham? He's telling him the secret, and telling us the secret of all growth. All growth requires movement out of your comfort zone. As long as you stay in your comfort zone shapes your future. The only way to get to a new place is you have to get out of the old place. You shed an old layer of skin to get to a new layer. So he was telling Abraham the secret. It's not about the destination. Even though we're always taught the destination in mind, keep the focus of the destination. In some areas that's important. But in the biggest areas of life, we may not know the destination. In business, you can make yourself goals, destination goals and financial goals. Even then, it may not always work. You have to remain somewhat flexible. But on the spiritual journey, we definitely don't know the destination. But we do know how to travel. So he was telling Abraham, this is the secret to all travel. You have to get out of your comfort zone. Or, in other terms, you have to get out of your subjectivity. The subjectivity of Abraham and the subjectivity of each of us, meaning our blind spots and our pasts, is what haunts our futures. So you could set your mind to go somewhere and go and excited, as I said, to go on a new journey. And you go and set out on the way, you're prepared and all that. You start traveling, and then you end up being back where you began. We see this in relationships. You say, I'm never going to do that again. You do exactly the same thing again. It's just a different name, different person, different street. Or other emotional and psychological mistakes we make, we just repeat it again and again. They tell the story of the devil called the Prince of Darkness. In healing, this story is used a lot. So a guy lives a completely hedonistic, selfish, narcissistic life, cared only about himself. Finally his day comes and he comes up to heaven. And he's in front of the heavenly court. And he has to now, they read him the riot act. The list of all his transgressions, they replay before him. And now what's your defense? And I didn't have much to say because you knew quite there you can't lie. The world of truth, Elam Emes. So what could he do? So before they give the verdict, there's a little break. Goes out into the so-called heavenly halls, the chambers outside of the court. And who does he bump into? Of course, this handsome young dude called the Prince of Darkness. And he says, "Why are you so depressed?" He says, "Look, I lived a life, I had a lot of fun, but now the day of reckoning has come, and I have nowhere to go, no way out. I have no excuses, and it's going to be bad." So this prince says to him, the Prince of Darkness says, "I'll make a deal with you. I have connections, and they say, the joke goes like this, that God created Satan in order that God shouldn't be blamed for everything. And Satan created lawyers in order that Satan shouldn't be blamed for everything." That's how they say it. Not all, but some. So the Prince of Darkness says to him, I have it all figured out. I have connections, but here's the deal. You give me your soul, and I will let you go back down to earth, and you can live your life again. This time do it right. You have a second chance. The guy was a shrewd fellow. It's just the Prince of Darkness. That's very nice, but with one condition. I want to have my memory with me. Yeah, but no big thing. You'll send me back down. I won't remember what I did, and I'll do it all over again. Prince of Darkness says, no problem. Sign right here. No problem. You'll have your memory. You'll be born. You'll remember everything you did and all the consequences. Prince of Darkness knew one thing that this guy didn't know. And that was, he goes back down. He's so excited. His soul he gave away, of course. He goes back down. He remembers everything. And what does he do? Everything the same way, exactly as he did the first time. Basically, this is a lesson to all of us. And you see this all the time. People say, I learned the lesson, I learned the lesson. How many people really learn the lesson? And don't do it again. We do it again and again because whatever it was that compelled you to do it the first time compels you to do it the second time. Even the first time, yeah, you may say, I didn't know, I didn't make a mistake. Fact is, we are creatures of habit and routines, and it doesn't matter how much our mind tells us, we're full of constantly doing things that our mind tells us is wrong. Because there's another part of us, there's another voice, and suddenly you become blind, or insane, or you minimize, or you deny, etc., etc. And that's what the Prince of Darkness knew. That it doesn't matter, he could remember everything and he'll do everything the same way again, no problem. I don't know what happened the next time around when he came up, but I found the follow-up to the story. Now, so it comes down to this, that our intentions and our drive and energy can be very, very positive, but if you're carrying baggage, that's what God tells Abraham, release the baggage, and then you'll be free, you'll go wherever you want to go. And that's the deeper meaning in El Eretz Asher Areka, go to the land that I will show you. I will show you. Areka doesn't just mean the Areka, the land. Areka, you, the person. I will show you who you really are. Because as long as you live in the shadow of these three subjective forces, Artzacha. Artzacha is the social influences. Maladcha, your natural inherent self-love and subjectivity. And Beis Avicha, the attitudes of your parents. As long as these three factors are defining your life, then you are a product of someone else's life, not your own. You're not you. You're playing out something that you're repeating or reacting to something that happened to you. You want to really find yourself, Areka, you need to release those three things. That's what God was telling Abraham. And that's why the emphasis was not so much on the destination. It wasn't about the physical destination. He found his way. Abraham figured it out. He went to Israel, and history changed as a result. Until this day, we're still fighting for the turf, as we see going on now in the United Nations. So, united against, right. On the other hand, what was more important to emphasize, where do you leave? So it's interesting. So Rosh Hashanah is around the corner, around the threshold, and there will be new energy. The question is, what are we bringing into this day? We're coming in. You can buy new clothing, you can eat new foods, and you can have new attitudes and a new mindset and resolutions and all that. But you're still you. It's still you of yesterday. And the question is, how do you deal with that? Well, the first is, as I always say, half the cure is awareness. First, you need to know what I just said. Once you know this, it's already a beginning. That means you have to be wary. So it doesn't mean we shouldn't be enthusiastic, and it doesn't mean Rosh Hashanah doesn't have much to offer. Remember, even if your hard drive is completely full, Rosh Hashanah still probably has you have a little 1 or 2 megabytes that can fit in, at least for one night or two, or a day or 2, or 3. But awareness that you have plenty of baggage with you and that you need a lech lecha is the beginning of the process. Because then you can look at yourself and say, okay, so what exactly do I have inside of me? What am I aware of? Things we're not aware of, we won't focus on right now. It's like untangling a tangled yarn or wires. You start with untangling the things you could untangle, things you're aware of, and then you isolate and divide and conquer the things that are more complicated. So that which is more difficult, either because we're not conscious of it or because it's too formidable, I wouldn't focus on, because there's no reason to go to war and expend all your energy on something that's very difficult. You'd start with the easier things. We all have habits, and we all have stuff that we could definitely free ourselves of. There's no person that's unable to do that. And that's where you begin. It's like any type of thing. You start cleaning something, and you see there's one place that's really very contaminated or polluted. First clean the edges. And then it becomes easier, because now it's isolated, it's easier to identify. And as we know, and slowly it weakens the darkness. So there are definitely areas in our lives that we can find which is one of the reasons we before Rosh Hashanah, and also specifically before Yom Kippur, which is just an extension of Rosh Hashanah in a sense, it's the conclusion of the process that begins Rosh Hashanah, is that we ask for forgiveness of people. I'm not talking about prerequisite lip service, like people tell me all the time. I remember this woman telling me that she had a sister who was always abusive to her, but every year of Yom Kippur, the day before Yom Kippur, she gets the automatic, on the dot, the forgiveness phone call. You forgive me. So finally, at some point, she built up enough courage. Her self-esteem was low enough, and she thought every year, wow, her sister's calling her. She thought it was a big thing. She finally built up her strength, and I helped her have a little chutzpah, I should add. So I feel I take a little credit. And she told her sister, listen to me. I don't want you to call me asking for forgiveness. You want to do something, right? Now, today's the day, start anew, and don't hurt me the next year. And you won't have to call me next year, Erev Yom Kippur. You've been calling me for 30 years like this. And then just repeating everything all over again. Because she needs it to relieve her conscience. It's like a mechanical thing. It says in Shulchan Aruch, in the Code of Law, Jewish law, to ask for forgiveness. I did my thing. But if you actually learn those laws, and I remember once teaching it on radio actually, and I think also at this class, there are actually very profound laws about psychological laws of forgiveness. It's not so simple. It's not just about calling somebody up and saying, hey, by the way, I stabbed you and almost killed you, but maybe you can forgive me. Or something like that. It's complicated. There's laws about, do you have to always forgive? And the answer is no, absolutely not. There are conditions. And both from the perspective of the person who's asking for forgiveness and the person who is forgiving, there are obligations. And it's really a really deep soul-searching process. Because then when you ask the question, what happens if somebody really hurt you in a way that's irreversible? They did unbelievable damage that you can't change. Are you supposed to forgive that? Do we forgive the Nazis, for example? So there you can say, listen, it's not our right to forgive. They killed 6 million people. The 6 million have to figure out a way to communicate with them. But however you twist it, the point is forgiveness is much more complicated than just... and again, I'm not talking about superficial thing. Obviously, you said something offensive or you hurt someone and you just want to mend offenses, by all means. But forgiveness goes deeper because there's forgiveness, like a woman has to ask me more than once, men as well, do I forgive my parents that sexually abused me? And we won't go into all the graphic details. And they did not do anything to fix it. And what about people who are not here any longer? Do you forgive them because they're dead, even though they never corrected their ways and never straightened it out? So it's a more complicated thing than just, like we like to believe. And that's why just using as one example, that's why before the holiday season, you want to have newness in your life. You have to deal with this. It's part of your life. Something has shaped you. Someone that's hurt you, or someone you've hurt. There's a circle that's been broken. Which is why mechila in Hebrew, the word mechila, machal, besides meaning forgiveness, also comes from the same root as the word circle. And it's used actually in a positive way. That the Mashiach comes, it says, in the future God will make a machal, a circle, in the tzaddikim. A circle, a dance. A dance circle. Why? Because when a person has hurt another, a circle has been broken. And therefore, mechila is a way of repairing that circle. So this is another topic which I want to go into here at length, only as an example of something that you need. If you want something new, you have to do something from your end. It's always a tit for tat. As I said earlier, the tools are necessary in order to be able to access the power. So if renewal is the power, you have to do something that's new in your life. And the more new you'll do something, the newer the thing you do, the more energy you'll be able to enter into your life. Which was why there was a custom by some to always, to every Rosh Hashanah, to assume a new hachlata, a new resolution. Whether it was a new studying, a new class, or a new tractate, or a new text, or a new chavrusa, a group. They started something new, or a new mitzvah, or a new hidur, which means to be particularly careful in a particular area in life. This wasn't just because the new year comes, we make resolutions, because you want something new from God's end. If you want the energy to enter in your life, you have to do something that's new. And then you have, like I said before, the tool. Then you have the proper shovel. If you want to dig up earth, you use a shovel. If you want to dig up newness, you need to do something that's new. And that's the midah keneged midah concept of tit for tat. That whatever it is that you want to receive, you have to do something that is in direct proportion to it. There's an expression we say, schar mitzvah mitzvah, that the reward for a mitzvah is the mitzvah itself. How does one explain that? So on a very basic level, you can say, that, someone does a mitzvah, a good deed. Let's say a child does a good deed, so a parent will reward the child with a candy, with a toy, with a vacation, with something the child values. Now it's not meant to be superficial. It meant the child at that point does not yet understand. So it's a way of showing a child this what you did was important, was valuable. So I'm giving you something that in your mind is valuable. The child grows a little older, the candy is not going to be sufficient. I'll need something more sophisticated. When you come to a point of maturity where the mitzvah itself is the reward, meaning you don't need a candy or some other external thing that you value that someone that's immature values. The fact that you helped another person, that itself is a rewarding experience. That's the most basic interpretation. But there's deeper interpretation as well. Mitzvah comes from the root tzavsa v'chibur, which means connection. A mitzvah actually doesn't mean commandment. It means a connection. It's a way of connecting. Just like a korban in Hebrew does not mean sacrifice. It means getting closer to. And tshuva does not mean repentance. It means returning to. Hebrew words, many of them that we interpret a certain way, are absolute distortions because not just wrong interpretations, they're actually contradictory interpretations. For example, tshuva. When we say return is the exact opposite of repent. Repent means you leave something behind. A mistake, a transgression, an indiscretion. Return means you're returning to something. Which one is it? So the answer is that return means your soul is always intact. And by giving up or regretting or avoiding doing something negative, what happens is you return to the real you. That's what tshuva really is, which has a whole different meaning. The same thing with mitzvah. When you follow a certain guideline, the Torah tells us, you're actually getting connected to your own soul and to the blueprint which makes your soul operate properly. So schar mitzvah in that sense means that the greatest reward itself is the connection. That's what the mitzvah does for you. So for instance, when we exercise chesed, love, kindness to another person, charity, so on one hand, yes, you may get a reward. They may award you, you can be honored at a dinner, or you get some type of plaque, or some gift, or honor. And people may need that, so be it. In the laws of charity, that's perfectly fine, as long as they're giving, even if it's ulterior motives. But the deepest level of charity is when a person realizes, that's why the Rambam, Maimonides, when he spells out the different types of charity, 10 different levels, says the next to highest level is a charity where the giver doesn't know who they're giving to, and the person who's receiving doesn't know where they're getting it from, which preserves the dignity and so on. But also the person who's giving is necessarily doing it in order to get something from it, or to be honored, because it doesn't know who's getting, and nobody knows. It's completely anonymous. So where's the reward there? The reward is the fact that chesed, in your love, in your heart, has been expressed. And as the expression goes, that sometimes more than the calves that want to milk, that want to feed, the mother wants to give milk more than the calves that want to take. Or sometimes more than what the wealthy person does for the pauper does for the wealthy person. Because what you get in return is something very profound. Similar to the expression in the Talmud that says that I learn much from my teachers, even more from my colleagues, but above all, but for my students, I learn the most. Now your students are not on the same level as a colleague, and definitely not like your teacher, but there's some depth on a qualitative level that you learn from when you transmit, that returns back to you, that's deeper than that which you get when you take. A power of giving gives something to a person that's deeper than anything they'll ever receive. So, in preparation to the month of Tishrei, Rosh Hashana particularly, to Nunis, we have this entire month of Elul, which is now winding down, one more week. And it's all about doing things that create kelim, create containers, vehicles, tools, that allow Nunis to enter into your life. So if we didn't have this month of Elul, you just suddenly dropped into Rosh Hashanah, look, with the grace of God, maybe you'd have an opening, a new opening, something would happen. But we're given actually a month that prepares us. And you'll see, a lot of it I documented in the book 60 Days, adding charity, adding prayers. This next Saturday night we will begin Slichot. Why do we begin Slichot a week before Rosh Hashanah, or approximately a week, depending on the year? So obviously on a basic level it's like preparing the mood. Slichot is the first time you say prayers with the solemn tune that we'll say on Rosh Hashanah. But it's much deeper than that. It is exactly what I just said earlier. You want newness, you have to do something to achieve it. If you're not going to act new, you're not going to receive anything that's new. It's direct proportion. So all the different customs that people add in the month of Elul are all meant to create such containers. Unfortunately, many of us, number one, don't even know about these customs, and number two, don't know its power and what it can really return to us. So Rosh Hashanah essentially is a new energy enters into this world. Are we drained from this previous year? I would say many people are. As I said, we don't even know the effect. Forget about the year. Just the regular effects of life and how it wears us down. And whether it's the psychological wounds and scars. But then you add the equation, latest events in this past year. Number one, for example, the economy. Yes, money is not all of life, but without money you can't live. And the anxieties that come from people who lose money or people who don't have a secure job also eats away at us. As a matter of fact, Mayim Rabbim, it's compared to the flood, the raging floods, that so many scholars and Hasidim always would come to their rabbis and their rebbes and their teachers saying, how do I free myself from the worries of not being able to make ends meet? So even lofty, even elevated people had that dilemma. Obviously it takes on a whole new proportion in our time where a lot of the worries are just self-generated and are not real. But the fact is, it doesn't create security in our lives and definitely adds to the draining element. And then you add other things that are going on in the world. This past year was a pretty volatile year, more than any recent memory. Besides the economy, just what's going on in the Middle East. So even though it may not affect us directly, but number one is if you're a sensitive human being, sensitive to the human condition, especially to Israel and Middle East and so on, the events there are having impact and will have a profound impact. September 11th, 10 years ago, for Americans, there's still a shadow that hangs over this country. And even though, as I said earlier, some things remain in the back end, it doesn't necessarily consciously affect us, but it's there. It created a major vulnerability. The United States was invulnerable until that point. And thank God you don't even want to mention it. But we know anything can happen anytime. We live in a very open world. I don't want to paint any scenarios. I'm sure everybody has their imagination. And we live in a world that is unpredictable, basically. So on one hand, yes, computers and technology and so on has created an unbelievable amount of predictability, except our Toshiba here tonight. But on the other hand, that's all the machines. On a personal level, we live in very difficult times, in my opinion. Fragile times. And I especially add to the equation the area of relationships. We live in a time of crisis of relationships, and it's not getting better. So I'm not here to paint a negative picture, but it's more like I said earlier, it's important to know the darkness if you want to fight the darkness. So we're not talking about being consumed with it. There's an expression, anon pola yamama anan. It's an expression from the Talmud. We are day workers. Our job is to bring light into this world. Our battles should be to be a light unto nations, to illuminate, to radiate, to warm others. But it's important sometimes to know what the enemy is. Not to dwell on it and not to be obsessed with it, but to know, and the enemy above all, as I said, is our own habits and routines and complacency that comes along with it. So we're now in a period, especially this last week before Rosh Hashanah, to challenge the status quo, our own status quo. There's nothing that anyone can say, including myself, to tell you, to shake you up. When God told Abraham, Lech lecha ma'artzecha, m'moladecha, m'beis avicha, lech lecha, Abraham was 75 years old, and he had already discovered God. And there are different opinions of what age. Some say at 3, some say at 40, etc. To reconcile between all of them, some commentators say that he discovered God in all those stages. It was just different levels of awareness. So, but by all accounts, Abraham is no slouch at 75. I don't know if that's an appropriate word to use for Abraham, but he was a mature spiritual person who paid heavy prices. So when he heard Lech Lecha was a statement that didn't come when he was 5 years old. Which means, you wonder, if God didn't, what happens if God would have told him a year earlier, or 5 years earlier? Maybe he wasn't ready for it. Even Abraham. So you can see from that it's a complicated matter to leave your routines, your subjectivity. And yet, that's what he told him. So the bottom line is, Abraham was ready to hear it. It's like they say, the master will come when the student is ready. There are times that God himself, and definitely our teachers and mentors, the wise ones, know what to say and what not to say. If you are blessed in finding someone you can consult with in your life, that you trust, you can learn a lot more from what they don't tell you than from what they tell you, if they're the real thing. Because they also understand that certain things you may not be ready for. And it's not about being condescending or patronizing or judgmental. It's just sensitivity. It's like sensitivity to your own child. Not to push more. You have to know how to give it to the level that the person can receive it. And above all, you want to give it to someone that they can own their decision. The destiny of nations is determined. Who will win wars? Who will lose wars? The destiny of communities, and of course the destiny of ourselves. We say it in the Nisana Taikif and other prayers that will say that everyone passes through God's eyes. God remembers everyone, and designates. Now, most of us have been trained, again, the stereotype, which maybe is also Lech Lecha that we all need, to get out of the stereotype, that all this is about causing us to have to tremble in fear that, time has come, like the guy that came up to the prince to heaven. Now you're meeting God, and God is the judgment day. Most people, Rosh Hashanah is judgment day. And everybody reverts into their superstitious mode. What kind of deal can I strike with God that everything will be good? I remember growing up in my community, there was this guy who was a very intelligent, scholarly guy. Rosh Hashanah, I don't know, when I was a kid I was impressed. When I got older, I said, this guy's just an idiot. He has a superstition that if he didn't stand at a certain place in synagogue, on Rosh Hashanah, his year would be over. Now, we all have our crazy stuff, like ball players have it, and people do things if they don't go through certain motion, an ayin hara, a curse, whatever they call the evil eye. The philosophy I go by is what I heard from my Rebbe was that an ayin hara, an evil eye, affects only those that believe in it. Which is, again, its own vicious cycle. It means if you believe in it, you give it power. And if you don't, you don't. So there's a concept of mazel, absolutely. But it says, a mazel Yisrael, which means that Jews do not have a mazel, they're not controlled by it. Is there predisposition and leaning? Of course, we're all born with different leanings and different personality types and dispositions, but it doesn't mean you're doomed or your destiny is defined. Maimonides makes it very clear that whether you'll be wealthy or poor, tall or short, and many other personality traits, that is not up to us. But whether you'll be good or evil, whether you'll do something right or wrong, that's up to us. And there are people who are blessed with all these gifts and do the wrong thing, and there are people with no gifts and do the right thing. So the only thing that's not preordained is free will. Or as the cynic said, we must believe in free will. We have no choice. So you work that out. Which one is it? Is it free will or is it no choice? So Rosh Hashanah is a day of not, in my mind, not a day of we have to tremble or we have to fear. And the day that it's going to determine whether we're going to live or die by fire or by water, etc., etc. It's actually a day that is a positive day. It's a day of accountability, living up to our potential. I know accountability is not something anyone likes. But accountability is the thing that is the most dignified thing you expect from someone you love. If I were to say I love somebody and they're not accountable, it means I don't love them, I don't care. So accountability, which has taken on so many negative implications, is a very, very powerful, positive thing. It means I love you. That's why I want to be accountable to you and you to me. It's because of the potential that we believe in each other. That's what Rosh Hashanah is about. So it's about understanding that we're talking about our destinies in a positive sense, that we're partners with the divine, with God. And this partnership on Rosh Hashanah is a time for a renewal. The contract has to be renewed. And that's why the whole universe goes into a slumber, into a comatose state, like sleep. And now's the time for a renewal. And we know from God's end the renewal will come, but we have to do our part. And yes, we can change destiny. It's not like just in heaven they decree this person's going to die and this one's not going to die. Even that can be changed, which is why we are so active on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. If it's just destined, we can just go to sleep and whatever happens, happens. It's because it's being written, and the script is written by both of us, God and us. Now, I have to tell the story. I always tell Slichas story about the Baal Shem Tov. His students came to him asking the Baal Shem Tov to how do you really prepare for Rosh Hashanah? So he says to them, this coming Shabbos is Shabbos Slichas, which is the Shabbos before, sometimes before Rosh Hashanah, sometimes a little earlier than that. And Saturday night is the beginning of Slichas, Motzei Menucha. Like this coming Saturday night will be Slichas at midnight or 1 a.m. And go to this and this town and stay in an inn at the edge of town, and there you learn how to prepare for Rosh Hashanah. Okay, so they go for Shabbos and they stay there, the few of the students, and they meet the innkeeper and his wife and the family, and very sweet and nice people, very pure, innocent, but nothing remarkable, at least in their mind. Okay, Shabbos passes, comes and goes. Saturday night, so they said, okay, maybe something will happen Slichas time. They watch, nothing going on. Everyone goes to a small shul, they say Slichas, they come home, everyone goes to sleep. But suddenly, 3-4 a.m., middle of the Saturday night, after everyone went to sleep, they suddenly hear some rustling going on out in the, I don't know if those days there was a lobby, but whatever it is, the outer sanctum of the inn, the krechme. Okay. And they peek out through the door and they see the host, the innkeeper, is all dressed up like a holiday clothing, and he's all awake, and he's busy. So they didn't want to disturb him. They thought maybe there's something going on here. They knew to keep their eyes open. Okay, and suddenly they see he goes up. He has on the upper shelf, he has two big ledgers, books. The big ledgers. He brings them down, schleps them down. And they're intrigued. What is going on here? Because they thought maybe he's like some type of thief. Maybe he's got some secret negotiations. Anyway, he opens up ledger number 1, and he begins to read. And he has there listed all the transgressions, all the iniquities that he fell through upon throughout the year. And you can imagine an innkeeper like that. What were his biggest transgressions? He even remembered that one Tuesday, 3-4 months ago, he woke up a little late for prayer service. One Shabbos, he wasn't so nice to his children. He had it all listed. You can imagine, the guy has it listed. You can imagine how many sins the guy already had. Okay, he finishes listing all his things, reading it out loud, and then he suddenly opens ledger number 2, and they're wondering, what's in this ledger? Maybe the real sins, like the hardcore stuff. No. Second ledger is all the things he asked of God that God didn't grant him. And he starts reading, and of course, and he starts reading. I asked you that the cow should live a little longer so we'd have a little extra milk, so we'd make a little extra money so I could pay for my children's education. I didn't get that. My wife should not be sick that week. She was sick all week. My children, he went through a list of all the things he did not get, he was not granted. And there he has the 2 ledgers open. The students of the Baal Shem Tov are peeking through the door. They have to see what's going to happen here. And the man with the two ledgers turns his hands up to heaven and his eyes up to heaven, and he says, "Okay, God, listen. I wasn't perfect, but neither were you. I didn't do everything you asked me. You didn't do everything I asked you. So let's call it even." And he closed both ledgers, and we'll start a new year fresh. And this year we'll try to be better to each other. And that was that. So this is what they learned from how do you prepare for Rosh Hashanah. What was the point? That it's not about guilt, which isn't a Jewish concept anyway. I don't know where it even got into Judaism. Or about fear and trembling and angry before an angry God who's going to avenge us, avenge for the sins that we did, which is the impression, the childish viewpoint that most of us have, if we have an impression that we respect of God, which if you think about it, it's plain ridiculous. First of all, what are we talking about? Creator and creation. Not even in the same league here. Why would God created flawed human beings to do what? To punish us when we make a mistake? Is there a human being that does not make a mistake? So what is that? What is going on exactly? Just to have an image of God like that is a major distortion. It's like a God who's like getting even, like a petty fight between two equals, or maybe not two equals, between a parent and a child, between a teacher and a student. The second example from the Baal Shem Tov is, we say Al Chet, not Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. Al Chet is where we confess our sins. Now, confession is also one of those concepts, whether it's Jewish or not Jewish concept. The Christians confess, but they took it from somewhere. We have a thing called vidui. We say every day, weekdays, when it's not a special holiday or special day, we say tachnun after Shon Esrei, and we even bang our chests, Shamru, Bagadnu, and so on. And Yom Kippur is the full-blown. There's a short vidui, a long vidui. There's a short confession, a long confession. Is vidui confession? That's the question. What does vidui mean? So literally it means confess. You say Al Chet for the sin that I did this, and the sin I did that, the sin I did that. Now when you read through Al Chet, it's not exactly pleasant. Like someone told me who began to pray Yom Kippur, he said, a lot of sins that I never even thought I could do. So he's saying Al Chet, he's getting ideas. There's even one Al Chet that says Al Chet shechatana b'yetzer hara. This for the sin that I did to you with my yetzer hara. So the Shalah asks, what do you mean? Every sin is with the yetzer hara. What was one specific one? So his answer is interesting. He says there's some sins that even yetzer hara didn't want to do, and so you in a sense Al Chet shechatana, that you incited your yetzer hara. So Al Chet is Baal Shem Tov comes to a certain shul on Yom Kippur. As you know, the Baal Shem Tov would wander about shul to shul. He comes to one shul Yom Kippur, and he walks in, and he hears the chazan, beautiful chazan, is singing a melody, cheerful, exciting melody, beautiful melody. So he's thinking, maybe where are they up to? Maybe it's when the Kohen comes out of the Holy of Holies. There's a beautiful prayer, the splendor of the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, or maybe it's another section. And lo and behold, to his amazement, the guy's singing Al Chet. There's vidui about all these sins, and he's singing it with the most cheerful Simchas Torah type of song. The Baal Shem Tov is very intrigued by this. What is he? Maybe he doesn't know what he's reading, but he clearly sees he's a guy that understands the words, Pre-Rosh Hamilas. So he waits till after davening. He finally goes over to the chazan, and he says to him, "Can you explain? It was beautiful davening, but I have to ask you one thing. He came to Al Chet. It was more cheerful than anywhere else almost. How do you reconcile that? It's not exactly a pleasant prayer. It should be said with remorse, with sadness." And the simple chazans answered very simple. He said, in a king's palace, he said, there are different jobs. There are people who serve the food. There are people who prepare the food. There are people who put the king's crown on his head. There are those who write letters. There are those who are secretaries that allow people in. Now, there's a whole crew. And then there's also a janitor. So a janitor has to clean up. You have to clean up. We live in a world where there's dust gathers and dirt gathers. You have to clean up. He says, I see myself as the chazan, as the janitor. When I said Al Chet, I'm not focusing on the dirt. I'm focusing on making the palace beautiful. And that's why I started singing. It was such a great job to do. That's my job in making the palace beautiful. And the Baal Shem Tov heard that. They say that it opened up a certain, what we call the derech of the Baal Shem Tov, the way of the Baal Shem Tov, the path, very consistent with his path. This doesn't mean that we deny or minimize the mistakes we make. It's not about ignoring the fact that we all are human beings and we have flaws. It's what you're focusing on. Are you obsessed with the flaws and that becomes an end in itself, or are you making the palace beautiful? If you're making the palace beautiful, then it's not confession, it's accountability. It's saying, you know something, you have a beautiful soul. God created a beautiful world. We have to do something to make sure that it's clean. So you're not focusing on the dirt as an end in itself, you're focusing on a way to make your home cleaner. And you do that with the same simcha, with the same joy as you do anything else in the house. So it's a whole attitude that's more of a holistic and comprehensive relationship with God, more than just the focus on one detail, that detail. How Judaism, not Judaism, but how the teaching of Judaism became distorted, where the focus became so much on the negative and so little on the positive. The only way I understand it, frankly, is because of years and years of Golus, where we've been on the run, on the defense. And it's also, in a way, the easier approach. You know, it's much easier to just say the scapegoat and the culprit is your Yetzer Hara, your evil inclination. And the best way to do it is just drive fear into it as the best deterrent. It takes a much more sophisticated approach to think about the beauty of life, and then realize that there's some things in this world that are blocking and impeding that beauty to emerge. That takes a bigger picture. Unfortunately, because I guess, and it's just a speculation, maybe there are other theories, I'm happy to hear your theories, that for some reason it's gravitated to becoming very focused, almost like an immature approach. You know, a child does something wrong, you berate the child, you discipline. Instead of understanding that we're talking about here, how do you bring beauty into this world? And I must say also that I think that even Judaism has been contaminated somewhat by, ironically, by the distortions of Christianity on Judaism, which is that it's about original sin, and about confession, and about the devil, and about evil that is as powerful as God. These ideas have, in a way, seeped back into Judaism and has affected even our own education systems. And even people who consider themselves to be completely insulated from the secular influences of this modern world, well, with all due respect, them it's affected just as much and maybe even more. There's fear-driven Judaism. It's all about fear, because you start projecting. You know, you say, I know in my heart how bad I can be, so I'm sure everyone else is that bad. So we better really, clamp down and create all these defensive mechanisms. The best defense is offense. You want to teach a child why they should not do something inappropriate? Teach them the beauty of the palace. Don't teach them how bad the dirt is. Because then their life is at best, you'll create a fear-driven child that, dirt. But imagine a child understands how beautiful is your palace. How beautiful is your life, your soul, your body. Even your sexuality is part of God's gift. And therefore, defiling it is like an insult to your own potential, to God. Teach people the beauty, and they will automatically not want to have the opposite. If you just focus on the bad, as I said, at best you create something that's fear-driven, and ultimately you get consumed with guilt and fear and punishment and all that. So, I say to all of you, as we approach Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we will be here, next week is Rosh Hashanah, so it won't be, but the week after we will have a pre-Yom Kippur class, following Wednesday. What I'd like to say is that since this new energy is entering into our lives, into this world, including the Middle East, and including the UN, and all the other parts of this world, UN, Netanyahu said then, here from the Lubavitcher Rebbe, the House of Lies, but the new energy of this that enters into all of us. And we truly have the opportunity to change things. So we have the strength coming from above, but we have to do something from below. It doesn't mean that we have to do it with the same intensity. It says, person cleanses and purifies themselves a little below, then it creates a lot more coming from above. So it doesn't have to be necessarily the same measure, the same level, but qualitatively we have to do something that's a shift. If you go in with exactly what you had, you'll most likely exit with what you began with. If you go in with something different, with some shift, you can then benefit and somewhat take from that newness, that new energy of Rosh Hashanah. And this means no matter who you are, whether you feel drained or you don't feel drained, whether you feel weak, whether you feel overwhelmed, depressed, and all the adjectives of what this world does to us, here is a new day. And it's not just a new day, it's a new year. New energy, a new destiny, opportunities that are beyond what we can even imagine. So maybe 2 weeks from now we can compare notes and see how we've done. And take it seriously. Take a piece of paper, write down some of your resolutions. On the simplest level, definitely do something new. Start something new. But stick with it. I don't mean new just for a week. Stick with it. And you won't be disappointed. Because that newness will bring something new in return. And I would, as I said earlier, I wouldn't bite off more than we can chew. Do it in a way that you pace it. But everybody here is capable and definitely blessed to be able to do so. So with that being said, I want to just conclude by making a few announcements. First of all, Philip will be giving his class tomorrow night. Philip is right there, 7 p.m. So please speak to him. It's a beautiful class that he gives. Philip is a longtime colleague and student of mine for many, many, many years. Too many to count. Who's counting? Secondly, I will be doing some Rosh Hashanah related programs I want to share with you. This Saturday night, I'm going to be doing an hour-and-a-half learning session at BJ on 88th Street. It's going to be at 9 p.m. till 10:30. It's going to be like a primer to the high holidays with some nigunim and songs and some other surprises. So that's that. Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, the last few years I've done here in the city. Last year, due to unplanned circumstances, we did it a smaller event in Brooklyn. But something just came up last week, actually, so I decided to do it in order to, I'm announcing it in case any of you are interested. I'm going to be leading a traditional service in Crown Heights in Brooklyn. It's called a congregation called Avat Yisrael. It's a new congregation of a lot of interesting, cool people. It's a full traditional service, but I will be essentially officiating. What that means is I'll lead through the prayers. It'll be unique, but also traditional. So probably a combination of some secular, but more, probably I would say more people who do have some sense of Hebrew and stuff like that. But I will decipher it as well. So if you're interested in that, either speak to me or to Velvel, or you can just go to our what? Send us an email and I'll send you the information. I have a link. There's a Facebook page that we created for it. So just let me know and be happy to.
Tonight's notice also for the class.
It's on tonight's notice, right? Exactly. On tonight's notice in the email, there's all the information that you may need for that. So whether it's for yourself or someone you may know that will need some type of unique injection for Rosh Hashanah, I'll be doing Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur at this place. And so that's as far as my Rosh Hashanah resolutions go. And finally, I want to say is that we have here the book 60 Days. Velvel is coming over with it, which is, if you have not heard of it, it's a spiritual guide to the high holidays. It's actually a step-by-step day guide. Okay? For the camera, this is it. It's a 60 days guide through Elul and Tishrei that actually has practical exercises. I also send out a daily email about it if you want to get it. It's a free email, but we have the book here available. There's also a special prayer section. It's called Beyond Lip Service, about, in a way, how it deciphers some of the major prayers of the high holidays. And finally, I want to wish everybody, as I began, a Shana Tova. It should be a very blessed year. I speak to you from my heart. When I say at the end of this year, it's always good to acknowledge I'm not going to do a confession, but I will say that I acknowledge and I want to thank you all for making my life a richer life. And both those of you that are here, those of you that are not here, as we say in this week's Parsha, but I mean not here, I mean online, and maybe also not here, those that are in different worlds, but at least the people on earth, and it's an honor to be part of the dignified journey of kindred spirits and souls like yourself. So I want to thank you for that. And hopefully, like the analogy with the palace, we can only do more to clean up the palace and make it even more beautiful. And I hope we partner in doing this together. And we use Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur as a catalyst, as a springboard to get to that place. So everyone have a blessed year in all possible ways. As I said earlier, which means whether it's a blessing of children, or parnasa, livelihood, or health. And obviously those that need to find relationships, soulmates, be blessed with that. Everyone in their particular needs. And as we say in the prayers as well, even the things we don't know how to articulate, we ask God to give us what we need. So it should be a Shana Tova. Thank you very much.